Coming up on this Tuesday edition of Newsline at noon, South and North Korea prepare for a Wednesday meeting to arrange reunions of families separated since the Korean War. This amid rising hopes they will begin taking steps towards improving ties. Korea's benchmark KOSPI tumbles in the wake of a sharp Wall Street fall that was triggered by weaker than expected US manufacturing data. Plus, in a drive to boost Korea's employment rate to 70%, the government unveils a package aimed at keeping women in the workforce after they start a family. These stories and more on Newsline at noon.
Thanks for joining us. You're watching Newsline at noon. I'm Choi Yusan in Seoul.
Very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. We start with what will hopefully come as welcome news for thousands of elderly Koreans on either side of the Korean border. The two Koreas will hold a round of working level talks tomorrow, that is Wednesday, to set the date and location for a round of reunions for families separated since the Korean War.
Well, South Korea had previously proposed the humanitarian event to be held in the third week of February. It's a race against time for the two sides to get everything ready by then. Hwang Sung-hee reports.
The two Koreas will meet for working-level talks on Wednesday morning at the truce village of Panmunjom to discuss resuming the long-suspended reunions for families separated since the Korean War. South Korea's unification ministry said Tuesday that the two sides will exchange lists of their Red Cross delegations through the Inter-Korean hotline before the end of the day. This comes after North Korea broke its week-long silence to propose that the Koreas meet for working-level talks on either Wednesday or Thursday. South Korea had previously proposed holding the event from February 17th to the 22nd at North Korea's Mount Kumgang Resort. But will the event go forward according to the South's proposed time frame? Since it takes roughly 2 weeks to prepare for such an event, the Koreas are up against the clock. Another thing that could push the reunions back is the upcoming joint military exercises between South Korea and the United States, scheduled to begin late this month. Seoul and Washington say the annual drills involving thousands of troops are purely defensive in nature, but Pyongyang views them as a war game. Experts say the North could make a counter-proposal on the reunion dates that would have the event taking place after the Key Resolve and Full Eagle exercises, which end in April. But because North Korea has a history of walking away from its agreements, it remains to be seen whether the reunions will go forward at all. In any case, the elderly people waiting to reunite with long-lost family members for the first time in more than 6 decades will likely have their fingers crossed until the day they see their loved ones again. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
The U.S. state of Virginia has taken another step toward ensuring students learn about the Korean name East Sea as well as the Japanese name Sea of Japan for the body of water between the two countries. The Virginia House Education Committee passed a bill which requires school texts in the state to use both names by a majority of 18-3 on Monday. The bill will head to the full House on Thursday, where it is widely expected to win approval. A similar bill has already passed the state Senate. Korea argues the Japanese name for the sea reflects Japan's imperialistic aggressions. Despite Tokyo's campaign to block the bill's passing, Seoul-based Yonhap News reports Virginia State Governor Terry McAuliffe has said he intends to sign the bill once it passes the full assembly. Exactly 4 months from today, on June 4th, Koreans will head to the polls to elect the new heads of local governments. It may seem like a long way away at the moment, but the rival parties have officially started their 4-month-long race to the line. Our Kim Hyun-ji reports.
The pre-registration of candidates for the June 4th local elections began on Tuesday and will run until May 14th. The elections cover 17 provincial governor and mayoral seats, as well as education superintendents and local assembly members. Those who choose to register during this period can carry out certain kinds of campaigning activities. allowing voters to gain an early understanding of the candidates running in their region ahead of the main candidate registration in mid-May. While busily contacting political heavyweights for the upcoming polls, the ruling Saenuri Party is trying to deflect the opposition's attempt to paint the elections as a midterm evaluation of the Park Geun-hye administration. Saenuri Party floor leader Choi Kyung-hwan has stressed the local elections are about picking the best leaders for local governments, and not about passing a judgment on how the Park administration has done thus far. The main opposition Democratic Party leadership has issued a political reform plan that centers around scrapping the privileges of lawmakers, in an apparent move to get the upper hand in its competition against the dark horse of the opposition, independent lawmaker An Chol-soo. An is aiming to launch his own party by March and field candidates for all 17 provincial governor and mayoral seats. With the addition of An's party, the June local elections are expected to be a three-way race for the first time in 16 years. The Democratic Party's political reform proposal includes having all lawmakers report to an independent ethics committee, their plans for overseas travels, and commemoration ceremonies for the publication of their books. The Democratic Party is leaving room for cooperation with An's party, saying the public wants the liberal opposition bloc to unite and win the June local elections to ring the bell on the conservative Park administration. However, since it's not clear whether An will consider joining forces with the Democratic Party in any way, a major reshuffle of the opposition bloc seems inevitable. Kim Hyun-ji, Arirang News.
The ruling party chairman Hwang Woo-yeol has called for measures to support small and medium-sized businesses and help them innovate, marking the start of this month's parliamentary session. The Saenuri Party chief addressed the full assembly and members of the cabinet. Hwang said his party will prioritize building the middle class with a focus on creating jobs in local and central governments and addressing the high youth unemployment rate in line with the president's three-year economic innovation plan. He also called on the main opposition Democratic Party to support passage of a bill on North Korean human rights. Over now to a high-profile treason trial. Prosecutors have sought a 20-year prison term for leftist lawmaker Lee Seok-gi, accused of plotting to overthrow the South Korean government. Park Ji-won has this report.
At the Suwon District Court on Monday, prosecutors requested a 20-year prison term for left-wing lawmaker Lee Seok-gi, who stands accused of conspiring to stage a revolt in the event of an inner Korean war. Prosecutors also demanded that the 52-year-old lawmaker be stripped of his voting rights and be restricted from holding public office for 10 years after his release from prison. Prosecutors say the severe punishment befits the crime, as Lee had previously been arrested and prosecuted for a similar offense back in 2002. They added that Lee has shown no remorse for his actions and that he attempted to destroy the basic democratic order of South Korea in violation of constitutional law. Lee is currently standing trial on charges of leading a pro-North Korea group called the Revolutionary Organization. The underground group was allegedly plotting to overthrow the government by plotting to sabotage the South Korean government and U.S. troops in the event of an inner Korean war. In addition to Lee, prosecutors are seeking 10 to 15-year prison terms for 6 other Unified Progressive Party members who were indicted on the same charges. Lee has consistently denied the insurrection charges against him. A verdict in his trial is scheduled to come by the 17th of this month at the latest. Observers say the ruling is likely to greatly influence the Constitutional Court's ruling on whether the leftist Unified Progressive Party should be disbanded. The National Assembly is also currently reviewing a motion that calls for Lee Seok-gi to be removed from his parliamentary seat. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Now, it might be time to buckle up as Asian markets, including Korea's benchmark KOSPI, are bracing for heavy losses after stocks on Wall Street plunged more than 2% on Monday, the biggest fall since June, as worries over US and global growth continue to mount. Yulian reports.
Fresh concerns about the strength of the global economy on the back of weaker than expected data out of the United States and China sent stocks tumbling. Taking a cue from overnight losses on Wall Street, the Korean KOSPI dived below the 1900 mark upon opening Tuesday morning, falling 1.2% to 1896. This is the second time the KOSPI has dropped below the 1900 mark this year, since it was battered by currency turbulence in developing markets last month. U.S. stocks suffered their worst drop since June on Monday, with the Dow Jones Industrial Average tumbling 326 points, or 2.1% to 15,372. The S&P 500 and the Nasdaq slumped 2.3% and 2.6% respectively. Monday's sell-off was sparked by data that showed new order growth in the U.S. manufacturing sector in January plunged by the most in 33 years, while spending on new construction projects barely rose from December. Experts say the U.S. economy has hit a soft patch.
There was some concern about the fiscal situation, not so much perhaps passing the budget, but the debt ceiling still has to be raised. And there's a third factor. We do know through the latter part of 2013, businesses seem to ramp up their inventories, perhaps a little bit more than they wanted to. So a lot of people were expecting that production would slow a little bit.
Stocks were also pressured by concern over China's economy, which saw service sector growth in January stutter to a 5-year low. And this is shaking the confidence of investors who have their feet deep in U.S. stocks.
Most investors have about 80% of their equities in U.S. equities and also have anywhere from 60 to 80% of their total portfolio in stocks, which is far too concentrated.
With the U.S. Federal Reserve expected to further taper its massive stimulus program over the coming months, looks like the market uncertainty is here to stay for the time being at least. Yulian, Arirang News.
And staying on economic news, Korea's consumer price growth stayed in the 1% range in January, largely due to the price stabilization of agricultural products. Statistics Korea said the consumer price index rose 1.1% in January compared to the same month last year. This is the third straight month the CPI has remained in the 1% range. Fresh vegetable prices dropped by more than 25%, while fruit prices dropped 5.5% in January from last year. Now, it's often said in Korea that you have to be a superwoman to continue your career after getting married and having children, as childcare and housework are still seen as a woman's responsibility. But help is at hand for a woman who wants to juggle a career and their home life, thanks to a series of new government measures. Hwang Jie has the details.
The Korean government has unveiled a comprehensive plan aimed at making the nation's female workforce a new growth engine. Related ministries say to help ease the chronic problem of women giving up their careers after giving birth, new measures will be rolled out to allow their husbands share the burden of raising their family. That includes raising the paternity allowance for male workers by as much as 50%. The government also plans to operate and support a pool of substitute workers that can be inserted to companies understaffed due to workers going on paternal leave, and it will also expand the number of public nurseries. The government has also pledged to provide various vocational programs for women to make it easier for them to return to their careers. This comes as Korea's female employment rate sits at just 54%, much lower than the OECD average of 65%. The government believes that boosting the female employment rate is a crucial factor in achieving its ambitious goal of raising the overall employment rate to 70%. It added higher female participation in the labor force is also an essential way to raise the country's potential economic growth. The government will carry on with its plans during its weekly economy-related ministers' meeting. It will also make female employment the one of the main agendas of its 3-year economic innovation plan. Hwang Jie, Arirang News.
for your fill of Korean and international news. Join Chae Yu-sun and Mark Broom every weekday at lunchtime. NEWSLINE at noon.
Plenary session this Wednesday and vote on the government restructuring bills.
The U.S. Treasury Secretary says the United States may default if Congress does not raise the debt ceiling before the end of this month. Speaking in Washington Monday, Jack Lew said the Treasury would have to rely on emergency measures to pay the country's debts after the $16.7 trillion limit is reinstated on Friday. But he went on to say the new reserves will be sucked dry quickly as the Treasury Department issues annual income tax refunds. Washington's borrowing limit was halted in October as part of a congressional deal to end the government shutdown. Also on Monday, Janet Yellen was sworn in as the first chairwoman of the U.S. Federal Reserve. She will deliver her first testimony to House and Senate committees next week. The United States and the European Union are reported to be in preliminary discussions on possible financial aid to Ukraine after a new government is formed in the crisis-hit country. Senior officials on both sides of the Atlantic are said to be in close contact with members of the government and the opposition in Ukraine and want to get something sorted while Russian President Vladimir Putin is preoccupied by the Sochi Winter Olympics. Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych angered opponents in November when he spurned a trade pact with the EU and turned instead to Russia for financial support. Speaking in Brussels Monday, European Commission President José Manuel Barroso said the EU was trying to help Ukraine, but denied it was in direct competition with Moscow. The European Union is often viewed as one of the cleanest in the world, but a new study has tarnished that image. In the European Commission's first study on corruption, corruption cost the 28-nation bloc 120 billion euros, or roughly $160 billion a year. The amount lost annually because of bribery and other corrupt practices is enough to fund the EU's entire annual operating budget. The EU Home Affairs Commissioner said the actual figure is probably much higher and called on member states to do more to stamp out the problem. The study also shows 3/4 of Europeans think corruption is widespread in their countries, and more than half think the level of corruption has increased over the past 3 years.
With the Sochi Winter Olympics just 4 days away now, Russia is taking absolutely zero chances with security, stepping measures up to extraordinary levels. But experts warn Islamist extremists may be able to find a way through the ring of steel around the city. Connie Kim has the details.
With just a few days left until the torch is lit to signal the start of the Sochi Winter Olympics, security measures have been stepped up even further amid serious concerns Islamist elements within Russia's restive south could be plotting a terrorist attack. Experts point out terrorist elements may already be around the area, sitting like sleeper cells awaiting instructions. Citing a bomb attack at a stadium in the Chechen capital Grozny in 2004, a security expert says the bomb used then was embedded in a concrete pillar 3 months prior to its detonation. Ian Von Gordon, director of a protection training institute, says Sochi is bound to be a target as extremist Islamist groups in Russia's Caucasus region have vowed to launch an attack if the games go ahead in Sochi. He says it's highly likely people with ties to these groups have applied to work as contractors or employees for construction companies used to build Olympic facilities. Some 100,000 contractors are estimated to have been working at Olympic venues, working as bus drivers, or in sewer construction. Security may be the main concern, but it isn't the only thing making officials sweat despite the chilly temperatures, as much of the construction for athlete and media accommodation is still not completely finished. With a record $51 billion poured into the games by the Russian government, hotels still sit unfinished, buildings unnamed, and it's easy to spot people on ladders doing some last-minute fixing and drilling. Although the sports venues are ready to go, the eyes of the world will be fixed to see whether Russia, with little experience of hosting huge events, has what it takes to successfully host one of the world's premium sporting events. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
South Africa's late former president Nelson Mandela left an estate worth $4.1 million, according to the reading of his will on Monday. Family members, the ruling African National Congress, former staff, and several local schools will benefit from the estate that he left behind. The estate includes an upscale house in Johannesburg, a dwelling in his rural Eastern Cape Home province, and royalties from book sales, including his autobiography Long Walk to Freedom. Nelson Mandela died in December last year, aged 95. Back here in Korea, and cleanup of the Yeosu oil spill looks like it will be harder than expected. The oil has spread east from the original site of the spill in Jeollanam-do province to Gyeongsang-nam-do province, where the oil slick takes up an area that's roughly 30 kilometers in diameter. Residents of both provinces say they're worried the pollution could lead to health problems and that it will have a major impact on the fisheries industries, a primary source of income for many people in those areas. This after reports on Monday that the amount of oil spilled was actually 200 times greater than previous estimates. The Yeosu Coast Guard blames GS Caltex for not reporting the spill until 30 minutes after it occurred, which may have delayed cleanup efforts. The company owns the 3 pipelines that cracked last weekend after being hit by a ship getting ready to offload its cargo. The Korean government is calling on smartphone makers and local telecom carriers to address the surging number of applications that come pre-installed on mobile devices. In order to cut down on the clutter, the mobile industry will soon have to give users the freedom to choose the apps they want to delete. Paul Lee reports.
Today's newest smartphones boast more features and functions than ever before, but they're often weighed down by dozens of preloaded applications, many of which can't even be deleted. These default apps are typically pre-installed on smartphones by hardware manufacturers, mobile carriers, and sponsored software developers. But the Korean government says enough is enough. The Ministry of Science, ICT, and Future Planning recently announced new guidelines that take aim at the so-called digital bloatware, which they say takes up valuable space and hinders fair market competition. For example, the ministry found that a total of 80 default apps were installed on Samsung's Galaxy F smartphone released by SK Telecom. Under the new guidelines, companies such as Samsung and LG Electronics will be forced to cut more than half of their pre-installed apps. Officials say the move is the first of its kind among global communications regulators.
Users will have the option of whether to use pre-installed applications. In addition, we've laid out guidelines to ensure information is disclosed regarding these preloaded smartphone apps.
The measures, according to the ministry, are in response to the majority of people who are fed up with unwanted apps being forced upon them. In a survey of more than 1,000 smartphone users in Korea, 67% of respondents said they had tried to delete applications that came pre-installed on their mobile devices. In addition, more than half of those surveyed expressed complaints over the inability to delete these defaults. The regulatory guidelines will go into effect in April, but will only cover newly launched devices. The ministry added that it plans to continue talks with mobile industry leaders and also track the effectiveness of the new policies. Paul Yi, Arirang News.
Time now to get an update on the forecast with our Lee Ji-yeon at the Weather Center. Hello there, Ji-yeon.
Well, good afternoon. Well, today marks the start of spring according to East Asian lunar solar calendar, but it certainly doesn't feel like spring is around the corner. In fact, this morning was the coldest morning of the season, and temperatures in Seoul will only get up to -5 this afternoon, and other regions will also have 4 to 5 degrees lower temperatures compared to yesterday, and the wind chill is of course making it feel much colder. So a cold wave advisory has been reissued today across the most of the country, so be sure to dress accordingly. But even though it's cold outside, it looks like sky will be mostly sunny throughout the day across the nation. Now, temperatures will stay below freezing until tomorrow, but the cold snap should start to ease as we head into the end of the week. With that in mind, here are the readings for today. The afternoon high in Seoul will be -5, and Busan will only get up to 3 this afternoon under lots of sunshine. Now, for other regions, it looks like Jeju will climb up to 2, and top temperature on Mount Kumgang will be at -11. Now, that's all for me today, and let's send it back to Mark and Yusan in the studio.
Well, thank you very much for the weather there, Ji-yeon, and those are the stories we're following at this hour.
And join us again tomorrow right here on NEWSLINE at noon.